Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today. Hello. My guest this month joins me from Paris, and he is an actor, director, writer, and when I speak about him, I often hear myself saying, what this man doesn't know about physical comedy is not worth knowing. And I've been very lucky to work with him very recently on our show, Charlie and Stan, which was an absolute delight. Welcome, Joss Hooben.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Go on, carry on.
It's and now I have to ask, I may have asked you this in the last month or so when we were together. Chaplin and Laurel, of course, the subject of our show, were either of those figures you encountered as a child when you were first?
As a child, the first figures I encountered, I mean, I am from that era. I'm talking, I was a small kid in the 60s where I did not see these things on television. We were wheeled into a little parochial center with a big screen or in the school hall, and we were shown movies. And the first ones that I was shown of that ilk were Laurel and Hardy. And then later on, a bit later, I discovered Buster Keaton, and that was a real, I remember laughing a lot with the scene where they're both on a building site and Stan Laurel has a crap in his pants. That for me is an unforgettable and undeletable part of my childhood cinema memories, that. But then, of course, I saw, almost by chance when I was, much later, 12 or something, I saw The General by Buster Keaton. And that stirred me. That really did something to me. I was already a very big fan of strip cartoons, and bande dessinée, like they say in Belgium, and of anything that was humorous in drawing, much more than, I've never been attracted really by although we use it all the time, wit and verbal humor. But if I was impressed or if I enjoyed verbal humor, it was usually by characters that were very clownish, and not clever, you know what I mean, knowing, but more. So yes. Then at the same time that this happened, very curiously, I took up some dance classes when I was 14 or 15 because I felt this need to move and these rhythms, and I was never going to be a dancer, but I loved dancing. So this is in my system, if you want, something to do with physicality, timing, celebrating something, communicating something through that, yes.
And it's interesting going right back to that period. So you say you took up dancing. Did you have any kind of theatre in your background?
None. There was none. Nothing. There was no theatre for miles around where I grew up. And then there was some sort of cultural center that was built. Again, when I was a teenager, and for theatre, you had to go through. Well, you had to drive, I don't know, you had to drive an hour to a city. I was taken once to a play. It did not interest me. Again, when I was 17 or 18, I saw in that cultural center, just a small place next to where I grew up. This is a real deep mining area, countryside, the east of Belgium near the German border. I saw a physical theater performance by two guys that came from Lecoq, Jay Geary and Luc de Smet. And that was it. And then as it happened, one of them was teaching workshops at university when I went to uni. And so it was just three little connection points. This could have totally passed me by, and I would be whatever I would be now, and an Air Force pilot.
But it's interesting.
But no, I'm a physical performer now.
But it's interesting that kind of, so often I talk to colleagues and how random those connections are. I went to college and I was very reluctant to go where I went, but that's where I met Haley and John Wright, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I didn't want to be there initially.
Because that, of course, once I was, like I said, this has seized me. I was aroused and disturbed by this. So I was good at everything. I was university, I was studying languages and philosophy, but I could not possibly stay any longer. And so I quit, and I said to my parents, I'm going to Paris, and bless them forever. They say, well, if that what makes you happy, you know.
That's
and that's
brilliant.
what they
That's
did.
brilliant.
And I felt guilty, and I should have finished university. And then later I discovered that Gertrude Stein also said that she found university a bit boring. So I was in good company.
Now, I'm going to ask this question because the title of this podcast is Regrets
Yes.
I've Had a Few. And I never think of you as someone who would have any regrets. But I'm going to ask you, the fact that you didn't finish your university, you've never regretted that at all?
No, I have. Hang on, it's a double-edged sword, because yes, of course, in the sense that my hunger and my desire to learn and to nourish myself intellectually, it stayed with me forever. You should see the type of books I buy. I keep on buying and half read, and the stuff that I inform myself with. And I have actually ended up, connecting with, like, a philosopher who I'm writing a book with right now. And because I regret it. I continued somehow this reading process and this absorbing of knowledge, but I regretted that somehow this went not a bit further or deeper. But I did not regret having left university, and that I never looked back, really. Not really, no. I could have maybe done with a more concentrated 4 years where, but then there you go. That's just the way the cookie crumbles, and
that's true.
all the people I've met, I would not have met, like Simon McBurney. I would have missed him, so there you are.
Yeah. No, it's true. The time that you're there is the right time to be there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, jumping around, you mentioned a book you're writing with a philosopher. Can you tell us a bit about that?
This all sounds very pompous and important, but it isn't, and it is not meant to be. I have a desire to write, in the sense that I like to formulate words and thoughts and sentences and commit them to paper. Although I left my language area when I was 19, when I was 20 or 21. I'm not an eloquent. I'm an eloquent enough speaker and all that in French and English, but I'm not a good writer in those languages. I never tried. I was, especially in French, it's very forbidding. And when I do radio interviews, the way the French talk and the way they construct thoughts through sentences is very intimidating. And I never, but I felt, okay, I'm going to do this with someone. And I've proposed friends that are writers, but these are such solitary figures. They never, but then I started, about 10 years ago, I met 15 years ago, I met a friend of mine, came to see one of the first Art of Laughters, and he gave me a few. He said, yes, he said, indeed. And he's a philosopher. He was then doing his PhD in philosophy, but he's a lighting designer in theater, so that's how I knew him. And he said, yes, indeed. And he said a few sentences that I scribbled down, and they become part of the opening speech of the Art of Laughter. We stayed in touch. He is now the one that I always work with when I direct and create music theater or opera. And then I said, I want to do something with you. And he was very open to that. He's somebody who likes dialogue. And then when lockdown happened, my first reaction is I must absolutely do something so that later I can say I took advantage of that. I shall not be crushed by this or victim. So I called him, and we decided to dialogue for about an hour or two each week. He would write all that down, and then little by little, he would start to write things out, and a text was formed. And we ended up with 350 pages of Just Christophe. And I said, okay, if we're going to make this into a book, into a text, it has to be, I want to honor my Belgian roots. It has to be a piece of surrealism, of Dada art. If I'm going to talk about laughter and philosophy, this cannot make sense on just one level. It needs to, we need to fall through the lines and end up on the wrong page and turn the book around, so that implicitly, through paradox and misunderstanding, this book invites the reader to also think with us around these things, rather than saying, in a very, Cartesian way. Here is this proposition, and here's what we think about it. And we named this book Bergson's Dog, after Bergson, who wrote the famous essay on laughter. I think, apart from a few like Baudelaire and Aristotle, the only philosopher who really actually paid any attention to that phenomenon. And he wrote an essay, a brief a text called On Laughter. And we invented a dog, that this philosopher had a dog. And we call this Bergson's dog, Le Chien de Bergson. And Bergson's dog is always behaving in such a way that invalidates his theories. And because the dog is funny. And so anyway, so this had something to do with the man who thinks and the living thing that moves in a playful way. And there it is. It's going to be published on the 3rd of February next year, and then I'll absolutely. And there is even another friend of mine who was a comic performer, a Belgian lady. She's very good at drawing, and she drew a little dog, and that ended up on the front of the book. And the dog runs through the text, takes away a word. Causes mayhem.
Just that's
brilliant. So I had good fun doing that. So there it is.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Now, you mentioned Lecoq. So you found out about Lecoq from that performance that you saw with the two guys, yeah?
Yes.
And then, do you remember, because I can vividly remember the first time I encountered Hayley. Can you remember the first time you encountered Simon and Marcello?
Yes, I remember Simon and Marcello. I bumped into him. He came out of the school because they had class in the mornings and we had class in the afternoon. And because I'd like to show off my Italian, we chatted a bit. And I remember he gave me some advice. He gave me some advice. I have a very clear image of that, just exactly where that is. And Simon ended up, this was sort of halfway through. I've already seen him perform because the second year presents stuff, the first year doesn't. And then he ended up renting or hanging out in an apartment that we rented with 6 or 7, a whole bunch of first-year students. He ended up living there. And so we shared, we became friends because we stayed in the same place, not because we're in the same school. And then he came, then Hannes Flashberger was around there, so he was doing Marceau school. We ended up drinking cheap wine in the evenings and becoming very close. And then when he left and started to play, I was not so close to Marcello then as well, but to Simon, yes. And then when he left for England and started Complicité with Annabel Arden and Fiona Gordon, he said to me, when you're done with the second year, come to London. And I did, and that was it. It was, so that is the real, I mean, there's 3 things about the Lecoq School. One is, of course, the man himself and the teaching that now continues. Second is the place, the very building, the very space in which you are invites something. It is such an amazingly aspiring place for movement and such a secret. It's such a charming and historical place. So the space, so it's a very big space. And so you learn to love taking the space.
Yeah.
And I teach there now, and each Monday morning when I walk in there, it's very quiet. I just stand in the middle of it, and I go, I can't believe this is still unchanged since I was here in 1981. Yeah. They put a few licks of paint and changed some windows, but that's basically the same place as it was in the turn of the century when it was a place, to, a movement place for military officers. And the third real root of learning in Lecoq is the meeting with other people. You're always collaborating. You're never on your own. You do it with 7, with 11, with 3, sometimes even with the whole class, 30. And you just come. And Lecoq's philosophy was the other one brings you out. You cannot bring yourself out of yourself. The other one provokes you. The other one makes you exist. And if the other ones don't want to work with you, try and work with them. And that was a very, very, very powerful, very potent three elements of that. It's a context, it's an environment, it's a way of being, it's a way of connecting, provoking each other, searching, failing, searching, and not at all a linear teaching of here is a teacher and this is the knowledge I now transport over to your brains, you know.
It's very interesting when you talk about those three things, and in a sense, it brings me to my next, well, not question, but kind of memory, really. Was the three of you, Marcello and Simon, in A Minute Too Late, which is a very early Complicite memory for me. Did that making that show, did that feel like a natural extension from the school, or was it very different?
Absolutely. The show, the theme was based on the theme was proposed by Simon. He had a few years, or a year even before he came to Le Coq, he has lost his father, and he wanted to make loss a theme of a very funny show, which is an interesting proposition. And then although they were a year above me, we had as such not collaborated, creating material together. Simon and Marcello they were some sort of turbo street clown duo, and they had already made a show with Fiona Gordon, and they had already established a certain language. But with Simon, of course, I had already had lots of sparring sessions and ideas and ways of thinking about how do you provoke a space with simple object. Remember, we just had some bricks on stage, and we found, and I brought into that a stuff I had seen in Holland and in Belgium at that moment that was, as I said, quite Dadaistic, like the Mexicaanse hond and that did not exist in Britain. And I brought this desire to sort of not just deconstruct, but sort of Stanley knife the rules of theatres a bit, and recompose them a bit, and find more immediate ways to get there. And so this Flemish avant-garde that was already born by then had not gotten across the channel. But I was very how shall I say, influenced by that. Yeah. So as we started making things, we just did them. There was very few questioning, actually. There were no question marks really in that creative process. There was nothing but dots and exclamation marks. What if we did this? Oh, that might work. That's we definitely want to going to do. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do that. With the exterior, invaluable, of course, exterior eye and directing notes from Annabelle Arden. We made that show in a first mold, and then that thing just kept on being reworked and rebuilt all through the first tours. So there was constantly a process, yeah.
But I remember also slightly after that, when Haley and I were studying, and John said to us we had to go to see. I'd never heard of Complicite, but neither had Haley, and a group of us were sent by John to the Shaw Theatre to see an evening with Theatre de Complicite.
Of course, yes.
And it kind of blew us away that we hadn't really seen anything like that. This would be 1986 or something. And then when the retrospective happened with Pierre Aldi at the Almeida, we kind of hung out there because there was something about you lot that didn't look like actors. You looked like some crazy circus rather than the actors that we'd seen before. So again, I'm sure that wasn't deliberate. It was just who you were, but it felt very different. Certainly felt very different at the time.
And that we were, I had no, I'm sure Simon did, but Marcello and I had no connection, no idea what the British theatre scene was like or was supposed to be like. So we were just these immigrant artists that made stuff and were very charmed and interested to meet all these other people that came to us and looked so surprised and happy that we were doing what we were doing. So we were quite naive in that sense.
Well, we were very pleased and excited that you were doing your stuff. And the other thing, I suppose, that for me was obviously Complicite were a big influence on Told by an Idiot. But I remember in 1991, in a field in Holland, meeting Hamish and John when they were doing Flight to Finland.
Yes.
And that really, really clicked for me. And obviously presumably you met them through Complicité. How did you meet Hamish and John?
Well, we did workshops, and we met Hamish and John do workshops in Oxford. We spent a lot of time, or the first 2 or 3 shows were made literally in situ at the Pegasus Theatre in Oxford. And we did workshops. And I'd met John and Hamish, and Micheline, who was part of Complicité, and was my then partner, had met them too, and they befriended each other, and they want to make a show. And by that time, the strange thing happened. I went to do theatre, more interested in a theatre of movement, in the sense of contemporary dance, than as such thinking I'm going to do funny stuff.
Yeah.
But I was interested in it because it meant something to me. There was something about the engineering, the style, the art of it, much more than the fact that haha, we laugh at this. And then these guys said, "Oh, could you direct us in a show?" And I say, I said, "Well, what is it about?" He said, "Oh, we don't mind, we don't care, as long as it's funny. It has to be funny from the beginning to the end." And that really aroused, literally that. They had no theme.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, let's put it somewhere. You know, it happens in a park or on a boat. And we just made bits of material and sort of collaged them together like a Paul Klee painting, like very naively, little bits. And then we found the through line. And that was then a new revelation for me, that after Complicité, and the way already logically Complicité through Simon and also Annabelle Marcello's direction went to look for theatre and text and and societal themes. I ended up in this world that was much more, again, was much more surreal, Dadaistic, but a sort of I would not say an allergy, but a suspicion of meaning presented as such, which brought me later also to contemporary music theatre. You know, it was more a musical thing for me than actually a content thing.
I also felt, if I look back at the right size shows, you know, seminal shows for me like Moose and Stop Calling Me Vernon, I always felt it drew as much, not only on a European tradition, but on a kind of British music hall tradition as well. And that kind of clashing of those traditions together, for me, I found so satisfying. Was that deliberate?
Oh, yes, that was deliberate. I wanted also, you will remember, in A Minute Too Late, there is a dance routine.
Yeah.
All of a sudden in church we dance. I threw some of these acrobatic rock and roll moves that sort of still hang around in my by then already older body. At them, and we did this routine. And I said there must be a moment. Again, it's always a musical thing with me. There must be some movement and dance and music. And then we said, okay, what if we actually wrote and invented? So we got Johnny Hutch on board, and we got Chris Lana on board, who started to write songs, and we learned steps, or from Tobias Tuck, or from Ryan Francois, who came to teach us some swim moves. Because two things were happening for me. One was that I was back into my cartoon world, in the Beano world. And another thing that was happening to me, that I could also bring in, again, the absurdism a la Glenn Baxter, who was actually a fan of our show, Glenn Baxter, and that refusal of, or rather hiding sense in different places. You know, it's a hide and seek thing with sense. And then we started to make these shows that were very visual, very pictorial, with song and dance, but just the way we did them within our limitations, because we were not dancers, we were not singers. We worked, and they managed to pull this off, because I felt that, okay, there is character, there is a sense of surreal, nonsensical space. Why are we here? Why is this on a boat? What does that have to do with flying and with Finland? why is this show telling us not to call itself Vernon? And then within that, characters that are sort of strange dreamlike fantasies, like just two people who appear in jokes.
Yeah.
You know, like in Stop Calling Me Vernon, and then you say, okay, there is this very eerie sense of character, and then all of a sudden, through music or through a weird sense of magic, you add another level to it. So it's constantly like a dream world.
Yeah, no, and
I continue to work like that with musical theatre as well. I put layer upon layer, and I cut through it again, but it is always done with a sense of movement and music, always.
And this kind of, obviously a lot of your passion sits in that world, and your directing work, obviously, as you say, in the world of music theatre. Do you find that when do you miss performing when you're directing? Is it something that you?
Yes, of course. I love directing. I love teaching. I love acting. I also love doing things that I'm not entering areas or activities that university, medical schools, prisons, areas where theatre sort of comes as a sort of surprise.
Yeah.
And schools. So these four things. When I miss acting, but it has to be very, very particular what I do. It has to be utterly, for me, utterly satisfying and make sense for me. So it's very hard for me to be part of a show directed by a director and then go on a long tour with this.
Yeah.
I can only do that if, like we did with Brooks, fragments of Beckett. I could have done that again and again and again. It kept on being a challenge to find the color and the sense of these strange. Again, it's this absurd world of Beckett where you constantly investigate, like in front of the audience, you're in this laboratory of words where you go, well, if I say it like this, and if I say it like that, it seems the same, but it feels different. This is not a world they recognize. It's a world you need to invite them in.
Yeah.
So I do like acting, I like performing, but I don't like to do the same thing for too long. And I go on long tours. My attention span is short. I'm hungry for the next thing. So that's it. So when I say directing, also it is always creating.
Yeah. No, and that coming back to what you're saying about collaboration, that's the thing that I enjoyed so immensely when you were last with us working on Charlie and Stan, was the act of collaboration. It was utterly joyous for me to have that in the room.
Totally, yeah.
In terms of performing, and I suppose this is a hybrid of different things, part lecture, part performance, but your Art of Laughter show, did you have any idea that it was going to become so successful?
No, I found something that I was not looking for. It started with Tom Morris then at the Battersea Arts Centre giving me a scratch, sort of an open evening, 2 nights. And I had done these master classes all over the world. When we were on tour with the British Council, with the Right Size, one thing was very clear to the guys from the Right Size: no teaching, nada, nix, nichevo. So I said, okay, I'll do the teaching part, and I come to Malaysia with you, to Oman with you, whatever, to Ghana. And often I was asked, can you sort of in 2 hours tell our sponsors or the local school or go to this and share with us what you're doing? So I did. And I had this little formula where I said, well, this has to make sense. Then in Moscow, I did it. And then in Sarajevo, this has to make sense. I used a few students, if they were any good, if they could follow this thing straight away. I did some demonstration. It says, okay, this thing is about comedy, of course, but it is certainly first and foremost about the body. And then I had to make this statement that it's the body, first of all, the permanent that we all share, whether we are in Senegal or whether we are in Thailand, we're all upright. And as soon as somebody stumbles, we react, ha, ha, ha. There is something about that.
Yes.
That this is about. Then we have a sense of timing. If I can speak too fast or I can speak too slow, everybody knows what is the right flow of, and I sort of squeezed into first 3, then 2, and in the end, even 20 minutes, I said, okay, this is what I do in these workshops. And then one day, somebody in Holland said, this is fantastic. This is so simple and readable. This could work for any audience. I remember this. So when Tom Morris invited me for this scratch, I did it. And it was verbose and long. And I was staying in Hamish McCall's flat house. And I said, I have to show more things and say less.
Yeah.
So I then said, okay, I opened 7 doors. And in each of these 7 doors, I do this routine. And that's my key sentence. But I didn't have a way in. And Hamish gave me the opening sentence. He says, I need a way to start this show. And I say, here it is. This show is about laughter. And right now, there isn't any. and then they laugh. And then I say, there it is. And this always works.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful.
And then I had this experience. I'd done it a few times. And then that was the English part of it. And then I did the same in French. And it's in France where it went whoosh.
Okay.
It exploded. I did it. Brooke had heard this. When we did Beckett said, do it in my theater in the Bouffe du Nord. I did it there and it went ballistic. I was on the news. I was on the front page of the papers. The French, something happened, which is more about the French than about me. Mm. It is so important for them when they laugh to be treated in a very intelligent way. And I did not see this coming. This thing. I'm playing it every Sunday afternoon, twice, and they're there. This is how do you say? It's endless. There's an endless audience for this,
yeah.
And they keep on coming. They just keep on coming. But that's France, because when I do this, I did this in Edinburgh at a festival. I did it in London. I did it in New York. People come to you, so great show. Want a pint? That's it. But in France, it's such a thing.
Well, it's a brilliant thing.
It's a remarkable. It's
a very, very.
Yeah, it's a brilliant thing. And thanks to Joseph Seelig and the Mime Festival,
it is brilliant. Josh, it's been as ever brilliant to spend time with you. I hope we get to do that very soon when we watch Charlie and Stan again. And I really hope. And we
absolutely we're going together. We'll take the train together.
And us will go up to see it. But I've said this before, but I'm saying it live on the podcast. You have to come and work with Tol Benedict again, because you are such a brilliant imagination for us. So before we finish, Josh, I'm just going to ask you 7 questions, and you say the first thing that comes into your head as a response to these questions. Jacques Tati or Dario Fo?
Jacques Tati.
Fish and chips or moule and frites?
Fish and chips.
Ice skating or skiing?
None of those.
Directing or performing?
Watching. Performing.
Pirate or priest?
Pirate.
Molière or Marivaux?
No, I would say Marivaux.
Double take or slow burn?
Double take.
Joss, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'll see you in the next few days in London. Yeah?
Okay, thanks, Paul. That was wonderful. Okay, take care. Bye.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please keep it to yourself